Many of us have been at restaurants, and a lot of times if we do not want water, we'll ask for something like iced tea. And normally we'll drink this drink not really knowing what exactly the technicalities of tea are, or where this tea is coming from, what kind of iced tea it is. It's a very general term. So it begs the question, what exactly is tea, and how do we define it? I want to share with you information I've found about tea so that you can look and make choices on what kinds of tea you might want to try or learn about. So to do that, I will share with you a brief history of tea and how it became popular around the world, what exactly defines tea and what is not technically a tea, and finally two major types of tea and types of things that are not tea, called fusions. Anyway, so tea was said to be discovered in 2737 BC by Shen Nung, which is a mythical legend that he was sitting and tea from the Camellia sinensis fell into his cup, becoming the first tea. It did not actually become very popular as a drink until much, much later, and it wasn't until around the 18th century AD, around the Tang Dynasty, that it became more widespread and was being traded across different areas, mostly around Asia. In the 16th century, Europe began to import it, first with Holland, and according to tea distributor Tea Box informational site, England did not actually get tea until the 17th century, but it quickly became a major trader in tea, and it would use the tea almost as a political piece of power. And it would mostly, because of its rivalry with China, it would use India as its main source of tea. And in India, it would use a different kind of tea, black tea, while China traditionally would use fresher green tea. Nowadays, tea is spread to every continent in the world, and its major areas that is produced are in Africa, Asia, and Asia. China is still #1 in producing tea, but it's followed by India, and also Kenya and Sri Lanka follow behind. Other countries also produce tea, but many mostly produce it for local consumption, while China and India are major importers or exporters of tea. So now that we have tea, academics use these terms to define what tea is. A true tea is technically something that would come from Camellia sinensis, a plant that is native to China, southern China, and also northern India in the variant of Camellia sinensis assamica. Anything that is not made of camellia is technically not a tea. It would be called an infusion, but often are treated similar to teas in the same ways. How we see the differentiation between green and black teas is normally, and other variants of tea, is through oxidation. Oxidation is a process that happens when tea is exposed or picked from oxygen, or also exposed to damage. It becomes browner and often more bitter and darker. This oxidation also correlates with the caffeinization. So you can have a very low oxidized, low caffeine white tea, or a very oxidized black tea. Now that I've told you what defines a tea, I'll show you a few major subcategories of tea. So black tea is what is most oxidized tea. When the British were in India, they mostly were importing from China at the time black tea. The reason for this is, since green tea is fresh and less oxidized, it also goes stale faster, so the long ship travels would require something that was less fresh. So black tea became something that China started importing to mostly foreign countries, while they traditionally drank green tea. When Britain wanted to have their own source of black tea, they looked to their colony at the time, India, and they found a native plant in the native version of camellia in the Assam region of India. From there, they also made different variants in Darjeeling and other areas. Nowadays, most people use, because of the British influence, we use an Indian type tea as a base, but we also typically use a flavor. So something like Earl Grey would be flavored with like fruits and such, where something like a traditional sweet tea would be some sort of variant of black tea, normally with cloves or lemon. So because of this, black tea is not necessarily enjoyed by itself for its distinct flavors. Something that is normally enjoyed without any additions is green tea. Green tea is enjoyed in many places all across Asia, but one place that I am going to point out is Japan, which when they were one of the earliest countries to be introduced to green tea, they really fell in love with it and started making very specific versions of green tea that are mostly just in their own country. So most of the tea that Japan drinks, unlike other countries like China, is only green tea. And they, according to popular producer Ito En, they will normally, they will make different tea categories, but sometimes just by small factors like the growing methods, the timing of the leaves harvest, and the processing methods. Green tea, the way that the green tea's oxidation is halted so that it stays this way and more grassy, is that it's normally steamed or roasted right after it's withering in the oxidation process. So this keeps it this way. It is normally done manually because if not, it would just naturally oxidize. So, one thing that it was interesting for me is that a lot of things I call tea and that we commonly refer to tea are not technically true teas. Like I've heard of rooibos is a tea, but it is actually, in fact, a plant native to Africa that is treated like tea. It is oxidized and it has red to green variants depending on the oxidation. Other things that are similar to tea is yerba mate, which is traditionally from South America. These things are technically not teas, although they do produce caffeine like camellia synthesis. They are infusions. So infusions are anything that is also in water and absorbs the water. Infusions are mostly floral, herbs, or just any sort of thing that is not camellia synthesis. Some examples of popular ones would be chrysanthemum, mugwort, and what I like to call Jamaica. Jamaica is hibiscus tea. It is known by many things and is enjoyed in many places. According to Tea Tulia, Jamaica is normally used, the typical variant of Jamaica that is used for the tea is the hibiscus sabdrifrifa, which is actually known as Roselle, as its common name in many places. So in places like Australia, they would refer to it Roselle, but where it is very popular would be the Caribbean, it would actually be called sorrel. This tea is dark red and is made from the flowers, which are dried up, just like any other similar tea-like drink would be. And instead of maybe a typical bitterness, it would be a tartness. And the tartness would vary depending on how long it is steeped. So it is caffeine-free like most infusions are, and just like all other teas, it is very popular in many places in the country, around the world. So now that I've given you a few places, so now that you've learned a brief history of how tea became to be a global drink, what exactly a tea is and what it technically is not, and a few of the two major subcategories of tea and how they differ from each other, I hope when you go out and you drink tea or buy tea, you'll or things that are even called tea but may not be tea, you'll feel more informed because tea has a long history, and when we ourselves are consuming and purchasing it, we are adding to that history. Thank you.
Iris, are you here? All right, well, you start with this story about being in a restaurant and not getting water but iced tea. It sounded awkward and it didn't quite get into the subject in the more interesting way that you wanted to. The idea of ordering an iced tea or a visualization of an iced tea, that I think is a good idea. The way you kind of put it in the context of being in a restaurant and using it as an alternative to water, that didn't make much sense. But your goal was clearly set up at the beginning of the speech. You do lay out the contents very clearly for us at the beginning of the speech, although it does sound very detailed. And I thought during the presentation it got a lot more detailed than it sounded like it was going to be at the beginning. You gave us some okay information justifying why you're talking about the subject. I do think you get caught up a little bit in some technical terminology for teas without giving us the ability to kind of catch up with that. That might be one of those things that a visual reference would help. And it might also help you when you have to keep saying those technical terms, the Latin phrases, for instance, that are so often define the different kinds of teas that you're talking about, or the more localized terminology. If you had a visual referent to go with that as well, I think that would help. Even just spelling out the words sometimes would help. I did hear a good amount of research material being put into the speech. I thought you did a good job there. The story of its origin, since it seems like it's kind of mythological in nature, I'm not sure why you spent as much time on that as you did. It sounds like you're mostly talking about the time period after the English developed the use of tea, although there is some reference to the Chinese use of tea before then. That's a small section of the speech by the time we get to the end of the presentation, because what you really start talking about are some differences in the different types of teas and things that get confused as teas that are not really the same thing. I think maybe that historical information could be left out of the speech, and you could talk about the differences in the different varieties of teas or infusions, and focus on what is different about them, what their components are, how they're prepared differently. I do think sometimes you get into these discussions of the process that feel less complete than they should be. The oxidation and it makes it sound like you're caffeinating something. I'm not sure if you do something to enhance the caffeine content or make it stronger or lighter. That was not quite as clear as it needed to be. And since you've mentioned it, it seems like it should be part of the speech. The visuals, they mostly give us transitions from one idea to another. There's not as much clarity in them as there could be. Like I thought when you were distinguishing black tea from green tea, you know, the image of the glasses is okay, kind of, because we can see the difference in the color, for example. I thought the first one that you had with the production of teas in different parts of the world, that was perfectly fine. It contained information as well as something that we could, you know, learn about or kind of, I should say maybe be interested in. But the other stuff seems like it's all primarily about creating an interest and a transition thing without adding a lot of information in the presentation. I think you do a pretty good job speaking to the audience for the most part, although sometimes it feels like you need to be a little bit more technically proficient with some of the terminology and practice a little bit more. Like I said, I do think that you have a tendency to get caught up in some of the minutia and the details instead of the bigger picture. And remember, it's a short presentation, although yours is not as short as it should be. You know, we got over 11 minutes on that one, so you know, we need to kind of cut that down. Let me see. I thought the summary was helpful. I thought the summary helped kind of refocus the speech as well. All right, you know, we've been talking a long time, and it was a long speech, so.